are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me today is the one and only Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. It feels like it's been a long 2 weeks. I don't know about you, but I feel like the last 2 weeks, it feels like it's been forever since our last show. We had some excellent conference final hockey that we're going to be talking about here in just a minute, but yeah, man, it's good to be back.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, we definitely, like, when we get to talk about the rest of the league and stuff like that, yeah, that's really where it is. There's not been a whole lot going on in Flyerland the last couple of weeks. I mean, I've done a couple of little things here and there. I've updated notes on things, and I've done, like, I did a spot on the radio last week and just kind of filling in where everything is, but there's not a lot of concrete stuff going on. I think the developments of what may happen around the league are more not I would say important, but more intriguing right now than the actual Flyers coaching search.
For sure, and you mentioned it right there at the end there, but that's our first topic is the fact that we've gotten some, again, like you said, nothing super concrete, we don't have any finalist names really. We got some names leaking out there, but the team hasn't really confirmed a whole lot.
Right.
But it seems like we're getting the blank check coach one way or the other, because a lot of these finalist names are not going to be low-paid guys.
Right. So I don't know if you want to start with where like everything is actively, or kind of lead to it with like the names we heard and then the names we continue to hear in like the second round. Right. Because there was a lot of names that came up during the course of the week that the report was they were interviewed in round one that now are not coming up as frequently and things like that. So like it might be best to talk about them early and then get their names out of the conversation so we move on with what's
I think
like the direction.
I think we have to start with where the whole league is starting.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, that's fair. Barry Trotz is still Barry Trotz, and the whole league's interested. That's the bottom line.
I don't know how much Barry Trotz is wheeling and dealing here, but he holds all the cards, and he knows it.
Right.
Barry Trotz is kind of doing his little grand tour, his blah, 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 and then he's going to sit back and consult his files and make a decision and probably go home. But in the meantime, the rest of the league kind of waits with bated breath, and we saw Bruce Cassidy out in Boston, and people speculate that the availability of Trotz had something to do with that.
I'm sure it does a little, but that was a big surprise. That was a huge surprise. And honestly,
massive surprise.
And honestly, I want to add in what Florida is kind of not doing at the moment to an extent. I mean, the last thing I heard, Florida let go of 2 assistant coaches today.
Yeah, but I heard some talk that means Brunette's going to come back and get his own guys.
Get his own coaches. And that's totally fair if that's the case.
And I believe that came out of Jeff Marek.
It's just the fact that there's still questions there. The fact that nobody can really say for certain what his status is. Like, it's like what Boston did with Bruce Cassidy. He's safe. Oh, there's nothing here. And then the longer it goes, all of a sudden, complete 180. No, he's gone.
Well, we need to dive into that. I don't know if you've listened to the latest Steve Dangle podcast. I assume you probably haven't, but they talked about it a little bit. Cassidy was fired in his home.
That part I knew, yes.
Okay.
I didn't listen to that podcast specifically, but I know that he was fired in his home. He was told like a month ago when the playoff series with Carolina ended, he was safe.
Right. He has a conversation. He has a conveation with his bosses at the season breakup, and they say, "Hey, Bruce, you're good. Have a good summer. Come back next season refreshed. Right. We're good to go here. You're safe. Have a good summer." Three weeks later, your boss calls you and says, "Hey, bud, we got to talk about something. Can we have a meeting at your house?" And you're thinking, "Hey, I'm safe. Yeah, come on over, boss. I'll cook you a burger, right?" And he shows up and cans you? Come on, man.
Now, hang on a second, because if you, I don't know if you've seen any other like times where they interview, not they, but like any places that interview Bruce Cassidy, where like Bruce Cassidy is the guy who goes out and coaches his son's baseball team, or at least is like involved in that to an extent.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like he is about as regular a guy as you can find as a head coach in the league. Like,
right.
Truthfully, like he's probably the next step down from John Cooper almost, where John Cooper, the former lawyer who had a regular everyday day job, became a legendary NHL head coach.
Crazy.
Bruce Cassidy is still very much an every man's man. Like, hey, he's just an average guy who happens to coach the Boston Bruins.
Right. And John Cooper, by the way, in the same way that Connor McDavid probably should win the Ted Lindsay Award every year, John Cooper probably should win the Jack Adams every year.
But there's a catch to what you're saying, and you already know what it is, because the Ted Lindsay is voted on by players. I'm sure if coaches got to vote on who the best coach was, John Cooper would win. But that's never the way that this award works.
Is the Jack Adams the media?
I'd have to go double check for sure.
Okay.
But I think it is an outside source. It's not coaches voting for coaches.
Is it the general managers?
I don't believe so in that regard either.
Okay.
I thought that was another one. The general managers was something else, but beside the point at this point. Let's go back to the Boston thing for a second with Bruce Cassidy, because that team is in huge trouble. Because first of all, post playoff series against Carolina, they go to 7 games.
Everybody's dead.
Game 7, and everybody is injured.
Everybody's dead.
Brad Marchand, months on end. Charlie McAvoy, months on end. Matt Grzelcyk, months on end. Who was the other one I'm thinking? Mike Riley, months on end. Oh, by the way,
Patrice Bergeron may retire.
Right, the lingering question about Patrice Bergeron may retire, and now the story about how David Pastrnak basically has said, trade me if Don Sweeney's the GM, because I don't want to be part of this team if he's the general manager.
Crazy. And Boston, we've been talking about Boston imploding eventually for years,
right.
And this seems like it might be it.
Now, can I add another layer to this as well? Because one of the other things they're doing, one of the things, and I've talked about this at length on the show when it comes to the Flyers, which is you can't hope for things. You need, that's not really a plan. I don't want to sit here and because the funny part is that the reason people even got interested in this was because David Pastrnak was involved, because I think it involved kind of that World Championships kind of thing or whatever when everything was going on. But there's talk about David Krejci coming back. Now, first of all, that's a hopeful thing to assume. Hey, I hope that they can sign him back,
right?
Because he's already basically said he like Bergeron. If nothing else, the one thing that they have got in their favor is that Bergeron pretty much has said, I won't play anywhere else, and I don't think Krejci would come back for anybody else either.
Same.
So you've got your number 1 and 2 centers if all of that works out, but you need to hope that they are willing to do this, that Bergeron's not done.
And if Bergeron retires, you can always throw his money at Nazem Kadri.
I mean, you could, I guess, but
how about Nazem Kadri and Brad Marchand on the same line?
Well, not at the beginning, but
eventually in the playoffs.
Well, and the thing,
in the playoffs?
Oh yeah. Well, and here's that line already takes a hit though if Pastrnak doesn't want to play there anymore.
Well, that's
which is a huge thing in and of itself. Imagine taking that top line, that line that everybody puts the nickname on, all that type of stuff.
Perfection.
Now imagine having that line and having something about all 3 guys that is a complete unknown. Marchand's injured, will miss the start of the season. Nobody knows exactly if Bergeron's coming back or not, because there's always these rumors about he could retire. And Pastrnak seems to want out.
They're still going to find a way to end up with 112 points and finish second in the Atlantic.
I don't think
tell me I'm wrong.
No, I'll tell you why.
They'll figure it out.
No, I'll tell you why I think you're wrong. I actually would have agreed with you if Bruce Cassidy was still the head coach.
And by the way, David Pastrnak has 1 more year left on his contract,
which makes it tradable.
And then is he an unrestricted free agent?
But that makes it tradable now.
What a haul do you get for David Pastrnak at 6.666 whatever?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, especially if you're not so good and you can retain half. Do you want David Pastrnak for the playoffs at under $4 million? Hello?
Well, this is okay. So Pastrnak to me sounds like, based on all of this, by the way, doesn't this feel a little bit like the Tarasenko thing? Like the guy who says, I'm not going to play for you, but could end up playing there anyway. And then what? Let's see what happens.
The thing is though, when Tarasenko said that, the Blues looked like they were on the verge of falling apart, and then they didn't. The Boston Bruins look like they're on the verge of falling apart, and it's going to hinge on if they do or not. Because Tarasenko went, well, we're going to the playoffs. I guess I'll play here. No problem.
Let's add in another factor, too, because here's something about the Blues that I don't know if I can say about the Bruins. The Blues got guys who started to emerge that were younger, as you saw it go through. All of a sudden, just because, Tarasenko was their leading point scorer this year.
Right.
But here comes Jordan Kyrou, look at him. He's emerged. He's a clear-cut top 6 guy now.
Robert Thomas.
Robert Thomas was getting more, and well, he was already good to begin with in my mind, but he took another step.
Yep.
Ivan Barbashev.
Yep.
Like, where are these guys coming from? And all of a sudden, it's like, well, wait a minute. They're not some slouch of a team anymore. These young guys jumped right up.
They're the veterans now. They're establishing, or they're starting to establish themselves, and most of them have that ring.
And you go out and you acquire Pavel Buchnevich, and that makes a bit of a difference for you. Like that it didn't, all that type of stuff. But the thing when I think about Boston is I go, so okay, who's the young guy? Because the right answer, or the guy who should fit into that category,
Jake
also
Stanika.
seems. Oh, Jack Stanika?
Jack Stanika. That's it. I'm sorry.
I mean, he's a good player, yes, but
he's
a guy who really qualifies under that umbrella. Also wants out. Jake DeBrusk should be the guy.
You're right. He should be.
Like, theoretically speaking, that should be the next guy up if this guy decides I don't want to do this or whatever.
I still think Jake DeBrusk for Travis. I still think Jake DeBrusk for Travis Konechny makes a whole lot of sense.
I can't make that trade.
We can do some picks to balance it out. Like we can talk about value on either side, but I could see a hockey-ish trade with those two guys as the main pieces.
Am I attaching Ivan Provorov and getting David Pastrnak with him? Like, I know that's not a fair trade either, but you get my point. Like,
no, I understand.
Sorry, if you're asking me to pick between Konechny and DeBrusk, I'm picking Konechny, and I've kind of been fed up with some of the things I've seen Konechny do from a consistency standpoint. I'd still pick Konechny over DeBrusk because
I'll be honest,
DeBrusk is even more inconsistent than Konechny is.
That's fair. I think you're underrating him a little bit, but I think that's fair.
No, the guy has moments. I think DeBrusk has tons of potential, but I have not really seen it outside of what was it? It was either a game. Didn't they win a game 7 to advance to the final a couple of years ago, or maybe it wasn't that, but like they were he had good playoff the year they went to the Cup Final, and was
I would also like to point out that
game 7 it was he had a big game against Toronto in a game 7. They won it 7-4, and you're like, look at this kid, here he is, like. Finally, there it is, but he's so inconsistent otherwise. Like,
I would also like to point out that one of the reasons it's been speculated that Bruce Cassidy got fired was his failure to properly deploy younger players in a way that allows them to develop properly. Well, so, I mean, and it can be argued that Jake DeBrusk is, perhaps his biggest failing. Right.
Right.
So I am curious, kind of in the way that we've seen Travis Konechny falter a little bit over the last couple of years. I'm curious if it's a change of scenery trade for both guys.
It could. Well, first of all, it would depend on if on where Bruce Cassidy ends up for one, because
if he ends up in Philadelphia, it won't really help.
Right, exactly. but one of the interesting things.
But I don't think Bruce Cassidy ends up in Philadelphia. One
of the interesting things about the way you're describing it, though, too, is the thing that Bruce Cassidy had for all of those years in Boston while he was building this up. They made a Cup Final with him, all that type of stuff. The consistency thing with him was, or the consistent thing with him was, you always knew you could come back to that line. Yep. That line was always there from day one for him.
And think about it. Like, who did he have to develop? Like, they just had veterans. And even when you slot in a guy like Charlie McAvoy, he pops out of college pretty polished. Like, you didn't need to do a whole lot of touching up on Charlie McAvoy.
Can I add an element to that as well?
Okay.
Not only do you pop him out of college where he seems pretty developed, but you put him next to future Hall of Famers.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, is you didn't have to do a whole lot. So, like, who does Bruce Cassidy get credit for developing? David Pastrnak, he was going to be good no matter what.
I think you can sit there and say that guys like Brandon Carlo and Grzelcyk emerged a little bit under Cassidy's eye.
We're talking about, top 6, 4th, 5th, 6th defensemen. Like, we're not talking about, future All-Stars or anything.
All right. Well, again, this is why I brought up the consistent factor was the top line, because here's the reality of the situation. Boston was always a little bit doomed in a sense whenever Bergeron became a question mark.
Sure.
Whenever it became an uncertainty, whenever he was going to come back, now that team became a question mark for everything. Like,
he anchored that ship for years.
Let's not forget that this is a team that only qualified as a wild card this year. And even though it was not that small of a gap between...
It was a very close Atlantic division.
Well, no, I'm saying it wasn't that small of a gap between the two wild card teams, and the first team out of the playoffs.
That's fair.
That was a 16-point margin. But you've got teams that you know are going to take steps. You got teams that you know are developing as younger teams. Like, imagine how many more years if you take. They don't get Krejci back. You take Bergeron out of the equation. Their center depth is now completely demolished from what it was just 2 seasons ago.
I'll take Ottawa making the playoffs over that team next season.
Ottawa's an up-and-coming team.
Yeah.
How about Detroit's guys?
Yep. How about Montreal bouncing back a little bit?
Well, I'm sure Montreal.
There's a lot of talent in that division.
There is. Montreal's going to take a little more time, in my opinion, though. Like, I just don't see them going from worst to playoffs that quickly.
It depends on how healthy Carey Price can get over the offseason. If he comes back close to 100%, what have you lost? Just Shea Weber at that point.
But that's... Okay.
I know that's big.
Well, no, this is the interesting thing to me. I kind of view Carey Price right now in the same vein as Bergeron, in the sense that I don't know the longevity of what they're trying to do at the moment. If Bergeron just up and leaves, then you see what it could do to Boston. Right. I think that's already what happened to Montreal. Like that, most of the year lost for him, kind of showed you what life without Carey Price could look like when the successor's not like. Sure,
if Caden Primo's not ready.
Well, but think about it. Like the Rangers go from Lundqvist to Shesterkin, and Shesterkin looks as ready as can be.
Igor Shesterkin looks insane. We'll talk about him in a little bit.
And you see how it just bridges the gap naturally. Their goaltending has never been a flaw.
It's so frustrating to watch. It's so frustrating as a division rival, especially with the luck the Flyers have had over the years.
Sure. But now look at it from Montreal's standpoint. If you don't have the next young guy ready and you're trying to figure out who it is,
right?
You don't have time to be a playoff team in the years in between. Like, it's just going to naturally take time.
That's fair.
That's the problem. And it, I don't want, like, it's so hard to sit here and say what, like, trying to, because it is a little bit of apples and oranges comparison here, because replacing your two-way shutdown center, who also happens to be a really good point producer, right, and replacing an all-star, probably damn near close to Hall of Fame caliber goalie, if he isn't for sure. Like, Carey Price is right up there. The only thing he didn't do was win a cup.
I think if you're a goalie and you win the Hart Trophy,
I think if you play for a franchise like the Montreal Canadiens and are the winningest goaltender in the franchise's history.
That's what I'm saying. And also, just given what you've done for Team Canada, he's a Hall of Famer.
He's a Hall of Famer. Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I'm saying, like, the only thing he hasn't done is won a Stanley Cup. And
right.
Yet, think about all the other things he's done. And he does it all, by the way, with Montreal. So the fact that, again, that's about as iconic a brand in the league as you're going to find.
I'll be honest. I don't know the list of goalies who are in the Hall of Fame who don't have a cup, but I don't really care. I don't think you could name 5 goalies that I would say, oh, yeah, that guy was definitely better than Carey Price.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no chance that there's 5 guys on that list who are, you know what I mean? Like, Carey Price deserves that spot.
Well, you know who else didn't win a Stanley Cup but is going to go into the Hall of Fame as a goalie as well? Roberto Luongo.
Yep.
And because look how many games he won.
He gets
over
it on
the years.
longevity. Yeah.
Right. Like, he stayed in the league for a long time and he won a whole hell of a lot.
All right. And I'm being facetious here, but Carey Price gets in because he just had a 980 every year. Like,
Carey Price gets in because he perfectly represented everything for it wasn't just the brand that he happened to play for, the team that he happened to play for. He represented that entire country all in many different ways and did it as successfully as he did being a goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens. But we're drifting from the topic at hand.
Yeah, we're drifting
as
usual.
Usual.
Yeah, let's get all the way back to the Flyers coaching. So we talked about Barry Trotz and we talked about Bruce Cassidy getting dislodged in Boston.
Right, but that's where the conversation went off the rails.
Yeah.
And to be fair, Bruce Cassidy is the new wrinkle to this whole thing, because Bruce Cassidy is, as of last Sunday, even, and we didn't even do a show, but as of last Sunday, wasn't even a factor.
Nope.
Nobody was talking about, oh, he's a free agent now.
As far as we were all concerned, he was safe.
Right. So
including Bruce Cassidy.
So it creates 2 new wrinkles to the discussion, which is Bruce Cassidy's in the free agent market, and the Boston Bruins are now a team looking for a coach.
Yep.
So it creates 2 new things here, because you got to start asking yourself, well, which of the guys who are out there could be a fit for Boston? And then you got to ask yourself, is Bruce Cassidy a fit for any of the other teams that are still looking for a coach. And obviously a couple have come off of the list to an extent. Like, it's very limited, non-surprising things here. The Islanders go with an assistant. The Montreal Canadiens stick with Marty St. Louis and say, listen, you're no interim tag here. You're the coach. Done.
Right. I think Florida's pretty solidified, even if it's not confirmed.
Right. We still don't completely know about Florida, and I think even Chicago is kind of operating off of this a little bit, because I don't think Chicago dropped the interim from Derek King, but he's like almost has to still be in the running for the full-time job,
right,
among others. It's really complicated stuff, but mostly it comes back, everything keeps coming to the same discussion of the same, I'll call it the same 5 or 6 teams, which it's Winnipeg, Philly, Detroit, Dallas, Vegas, and then kind of Chicago's the lingering one. We pretty well assume Florida's not making a change for the most part, though stranger things have obviously happened as the weeks go on. Edmonton just got knocked out of the playoffs, but I assume that's Woodcroft's job.
Oh, yeah.
Don't see any reason why not.
Yeah, it's not really confirmed, but come on.
But either way, and we'll get into that stuff later. But imagine that. So, all right, Trotz really is holding the key to the whole thing still, and we kind of had talked about that previously. Because of that, if you're asking me to handicap which coaches out there are possibilities for the Flyers, or handicap the odds on the next Flyers head coach,
sure,
you have to put some of that percentage on Barry Trotz, because the possibility exists until he says otherwise.
Right.
The interest is there. I would, based on the way that I'm
willing to bet the contract offer was there too.
Well, to my understanding, there's no formal contract offer. I think Bill Meltzer tweeted that this week.
Okay.
They've discussed term with people, term and money, but no formal contract offer has been made.
I'm not surprised by that.
To me, that just means that you're starting to write up some of the things that would work in the contract, but you didn't do anything formally.
Right. That just means you're still waiting to see what Barry's going to do.
Pretty much. And, I don't want to jump the gun and give you a ton of.
Okay, so if it's not Trotz, who do you think it is? Who's the lead horse if Barry Trotz decides to go to Winnipeg or go to Vegas or
So let's do this for a second, because I just want to run down the names that we know got first round interviews and then narrow the list down. So Trotz has spoken to the team multiple times, to my knowledge.
Right.
Usually the process, and Bill Meltzer really pulled the curtain back on this week with sometimes it's through Zoom, sometimes they come in, sometimes it's both over a series of things. There's multiple conversations. Trotz has done this. Tortorella has interviewed with the team, obviously. We've already said that. To my knowledge, and based on reports of other people, I should say, not to mine. I didn't get a tip on this.
Right.
This recently anyway. But the report is that Bruce Cassidy did speak with the Flyers last week. Okay. Kind of as at the tail end of the first round of all this stuff. We've already mentioned Mike Vellucci. Rick Tocchet has interviewed with the team. And who was the other one? And we're finding out that Peter DeBoer interviewed with the team.
Yeah, that one's interesting.
I believe also, again, this was Frank Saravalli who had these two, that Jeff Blashill and David Quinn had interviewed with the team as well.
So they really are, okay. So I really do feel comfortable saying that we're getting the blank check coach, that they're not, maybe Jeff Blashill a little bit, but generally speaking, they're looking for a coach who is expected to compete. We're looking at the high end of coaches here. Pete DeBoer is not going to a rebuild project.
All right, listen.
Probably.
Here's the thing. I don't want to say that for sure. Because to me there is a very clear cut based on all of those names. If I look at those names, there's a clear cut top tier, and then there's a clear cut second tier.
Right.
Trotz and Tortorella and Cassidy are all well known, well respected, successful names. DeBoer might get in there. It's close.
With Trotz probably being the belle of the ball.
Oh, Trotz is at the top of any list here, regardless. But you know what I mean when I put them in that upper tier.
For
because
sure.
You're starting to see how they've won a lot and they're right up there and all that stuff. So I would say even DeBoer gets into that a little bit, even though they, you got two guys in there that haven't won a Stanley Cup before as a coach. That's okay. Like, they're still up there because let's put it this way. Until 2 years ago, that John Cooper fit that description as well. Like,
right.
Guys who have won a lot but haven't won the final game. That's
Yep.
that's the basis of that. Then I would go down to another tier when I get to Tocchet, Blashill, Quinn, Vellucci. Like, that's all definitely. And a name I would have included in that second tier as well is Jim Montgomery, who reports say did not interview with the team. So basically, take that name out, throw it away.
Okay.
Now we get to the other portion of this where you have to start considering the second round of interviews. Where does it go? Elliot Friedman said on the 32 Thoughts podcast earlier this week that, and this is a fair way to assess it because I think every team is kind of operating this way, he doesn't feel that Trotz needed to have a formal second round interview. Like, the interest is there, and it's up to Trotz. If the process moves forward, it's up to Trotz. So
I feel like it's very, give me your best offer. Okay, I'll consider it.
Yeah. Basically.
Right, you go around, you collect their best offer, and then you decide. And like that, you don't really need to do a whole lot more than that.
Right. So based on that, so Trotz is just the status that he is exactly what it's perceived to be. He holds the keys, and wherever everything goes is what it is. The belief was out of that Tortorella was getting a second round interview, that Tocchet could get one, that Vellucci's interview went well and he could get one. And then we're also hearing some things. Anthony Sanfilippo tweeted out on Sunday morning that DeBoer is a finalist as well. So I would assume that means he's getting a second interview as well.
Okay.
We can't really say for sure and certain where Tocchet and Vellucci stand because it's kind of hey, of course. Here's the thing. Vellucci could get one because the report is things went really well during his interview. Well, that's a good reason to believe that he could come back.
Sure.
I kind of get the sense that the reason that Tocchet could come back for a second interview is because he's Rick Tocchet and as a former
Bobby
Flyer.
Clark wants to hang out with him for 90 minutes.
Like, kind of. Like, it wasn't when that was said on the podcast.
Do it at the country club, Bob. You don't need to do it. Like, just invite him out to lunch, dog.
When that was said on the podcast, it wasn't said with a like, "Hey, that went really well" kind of thing.
Right.
Which, by the way, and I'm not trying to jump too far ahead, but when TNT's coverage wrapped for the year because they did the Western Conference Final, did you catch at the end of the panel? This was way after the game was over. It's like the half-hour post-game show was over now, and they were wrapping up on the studio show after the game. Did you catch? It might have been Anson Carter who said it, but did you catch the "Hope you're here next year" talk?
Yeah, I did.
Now, in fairness,
they've been poking fun at him all year for it.
Well, and I was going to say, in fairness, Elliot Friedman's talked a lot about how Dallas likes Tocchet. So
okay,
it's not just the Flyers thing where it's like, oh, hope you're here next year because the Flyers want you kind of thing. There could be more than one team out there that really has some serious interest in him.
Sure, so Rick Tocchett's one of the hockey men. Like he's just always got a shot at any open job, basically.
Right, but for me, it comes back to the three big names at the top of the list. And I do want to preface this by saying nobody really had anything on Bruce Cassidy yet. Like because I had somebody asking me about that, and I turned around on Twitter and I said, I think it's too early in the process. Like, he just got hired this week.
He's been doing a lot of talking about his past. He hasn't really done a whole lot of talking about his future yet. Like Bruce Cassidy has kind of been settling some scores in Boston.
Right, like I kind of feel like, and the way I responded was, I'm like, there's definitely interest. It's just whether he's made it to the second round or not remains to be seen because of the fact that he's just entering the market and the process is just beginning.
Right.
So, like the others, we've been discussing these names for weeks. Like even DeBoer, it was not a surprise or it's not a secret that he was out there and available. Like when Vegas let him go, it was maybe a little later than some of the other teams had done. But it was still not really shocking because everybody kind of had a feeling that was the type of change that they could make.
Right.
And then, we've been talking about Trotz and Tortorella all since the Flyer season ended, or since Trotz entered the market anyway.
We've been talking about Tortorella since Alain Vigneault got fired behind closed doors.
Exactly. So for me, that's the stuff I keep coming back to is those three. It's Trotz, Tortorella, I think DeBoer now is a serious player in this at this point. But which as of this morning, up until Anthony Sanfilippo's report came out about that, I don't know if I would have expected that as much.
Right.
You know, I do think it's interesting. Like we just like to talk about. We talked about Tocchet, and we said with Tocchet, it's obvious why there's an interest because he knows the organization as well as anybody who could interview.
Yep.
The fact that Vellucci could get a second interview still intrigues me because the fact that, again, he's a guy who has a management background as much as a coaching background. That's very intriguing to me that he seems to be a second-tier guy. Like, this isn't the same thing as the second-tier guys like, oh, we're just going to bring in another retread from this rebuild.
This is a new coach. This is somebody with no coaching experience in the NHL, like at the NHL level.
Right. But here's the... Well, yeah, exactly.
I know he's got all the experience in the world. No, I do. I just mean as an actual NHL bench boss, 0.
But imagine the fact that he's the one who's kind of surviving that, and it's not your typical retread. Like it would be so, I don't want to call it predictable, but I kind of would understand if you were gonna go the retread higher, like all these other guys seem to be, and say, yeah, you know what, it's Jeff Blashill or it's David Quinn. Because why? Because they've been through that rebuild process before, so why not do it again? It's a guy who just knows his position. It's a guy who knows start molding guys. Yep. And
he's going to spend 3 years. He's going to spend 3 years putting guys in the right position, and then he's going to move on, and the team will succeed.
Yeah, and you're not going to cross the finish line doing that probably, but you're going to be here to kind of be the stopgap.
But that's what we need. When we talked when Alain Vigneault got fired about who the next coach would be, and we talked about the fact that they could hire a Travis Green type, or like a younger, or less proven one of these, tank managers, as we call them, tank commanders, and that would probably be the best long-term solution. But we both acknowledged that what Comcast was probably going to do was throw a whole bunch of money at what has turned out to be John Tortorella, Barry Trotz, Pete DeBoer, all these big name guys coming in. And it's just, I still like the Travis Green type name. I still like one of these teaching guys, one of these guys who can mold the young group, because we've talked about next year's lineup is probably going to have a whole lot of young guys in it. And I don't want John Tortorella running that ship.
All right, so let's break this down for a minute here, because there's one thing I will counter with. Tortorella is the very clear exception to everything in here. Because to me, Tortorella is just a straight go-for-it coach. There is a part of me that has a feeling that you could bring in a Barry Trotz and say, see this process through, and he could possibly do it.
I agree.
It may not be great on day one, and it may not be great in year one, but if you have a 5-year contract and you really see it through with him, that he could come out on the other side of this thing and still be coaching the team when they get good.
I don't know if Chuck Fletcher survives 2 bad years, maybe even 1 more bad year.
Oh, I think he's got less than that. He's got the first.
To me, he's got the first. That's what I'm saying.
To me, he's got until Thanksgiving to prove that this team isn't a pushover and that they're not the worst in the league kind of stuff. And
things might be real very quickly next season.
But I don't think that. But here's the thing: I don't think that if they had to go, if they hired a new GM in the middle of the year, I don't think the new GM normally they like to bring in their own guy. I get that. I think it's a little different when Barry Trotz.
When it's Barry Trotz, yeah.
Again, that's why
you hire a general manager that you're willing to potentially replace with Barry Trotz at the end of that contract if that's what Barry Trotz wants.
Right. Well, and this is why I said when Barry Trotz got fired by the Islanders, and it was a big surprise then too. Yeah, I'm with you. I was with the get the second tier level coach.
You know what? Just give Barry the keys. If you fire Chuck, just here you go, Barry. You're the GM too.
I don't know. See, I don't know if they want to do that because I think that again, it would take. It's not just taking it away from Chuck at that point. It's taking it away from everybody that has some hands on at this point.
I wish,
but I'm just trying
because the people with hands on ain't working.
Well, I hear you, but that's how this is going. But I'm trying to. What I'm trying to get at with this is that made me change my mind. If you sometimes you don't have the luxury of saying, you know what, we're ready for that guy 3 years from now. We got to like
no. Yeah, when
you got to
a
just
fish
jump
this
in.
big hits the market, you got to hook it.
And there's an element to me, and I know that we've already mentioned the thing with Bruce Cassidy and the thing with the younger guys and all that type of stuff. There is still an element to me for like with him that you could bring him in and he could very well see his way through the process, because it's not like he stuck around a team for a short period of time. And his first year as head coach, by the way, I thought they missed the playoffs, or they had just missed the playoffs 2 years in a row under Claude Julien, and that's why Claude Julien was out after 10 years. Like, talk about a total like it's funny. I had conversations about this earlier in the week because we keep talking about, or one of the things that comes up a lot is the turnover of coaches in the NHL, and then the way that they get rehired by somebody else, and then a turnover again like 3 years, 4 years later. Boston hasn't done that.
No.
Boston's gone the last almost 2 decades with the same coaching staff in terms of Claude Julien's been the head coach for 10 years, and then it was Bruce Cassidy for 6. And I'm trying to see if I can see before
and then. I think Cassidy was an assistant under Julien. So, like, your hierarchy remained essentially the same for a very long time.
But by the way, it's funny because not before. So for 1 year in between, like before Claude Julien, there was a coach. Hang on, I'm pulling up who this is. Give me a minute. So Dave Lewis coached Boston that year to like a 35-41-6 record. They didn't make the playoffs, so he was in and out in 1 year. The year before that, though, for 2 years before that, the head coach of the team so this would be the last year before the lockout and the first year after the lockout.
Okay.
The head coach of the Boston Bruins, who in the year before the lockout won the division, and then the year after missed the playoffs, and that's why it probably soured out. But the head coach of that team was Mike Sullivan.
That's funny.
Who at that time probably nobody thought was going to be that great of a head coach.
Right.
You got to factor in something. He got hired as the head coach of the Bruins at 35 years old.
Wow. Totally
green, as far as I can tell. Like not like in terms of coaching, but you get the point. And then didn't have a head coaching job again because he was on staff. Like he was on the staffs that John Tortorella put together for many, many years. Didn't have another head coaching job until he was 47 in 15-16. And has stayed there since, obviously.
Remember when Dave Haxtell got another job right away? Or pretty right away?
I mean, it was an assistant coaching job, but still. Oh, okay.
No, I'm talking about the fact that he got the Seattle job, 18 months after he got fired?
Yeah, I hear you. And by the way, so as I'm reading it now, so Claude Julien was the head coach for Boston into the 16-17 season, and they fired him midway through after he was 26-23-6. And Cassidy took over and finished the year with an 18-8-1 record that got Boston to the playoffs. They lost in the first round that year. And then ever since then, they have not missed the playoffs since, which is kind of why this year, when your team, like, fourth place in the Atlantic Division this year was a 26-5 record.
Insane.
And then they lost in 7 games to Carolina in the first round, and that was enough to say, nope, you're out. That's why it's a problem. Like I think
I think it's a general manager and a team president and a team hierarchy that is starting at the bottom because they know it's rotting and they're cutting limbs out from underneath them to save themselves.
I want to read something that I responded, like a tweet I responded to about the turnover or whatever, because someone like shared coach turnover is kind of ridiculous. But I said, honestly, it's more than just the turnover. Cassidy won the Jack Adams in 2020. Trotz won it in 2016 and 2019. Gerard Gallant won it in 2018 with Vegas. And Tortorella won it in 2017, and all have been fired since. Hell, Rod Brindamore won the Jack Adams last year, and there were already people questioning his job status after Carolina lost in the second round this year.
There's no way he gets
ridiculous.
Fired. Yeah,
no, but like
they will riot in the streets if they fire Rod Brindamore. They will burn down PNC Arena if that team fires Rod Brindamore. He is a deified god in that city.
But this is the thing, right? Like, why do we have people who question coaching as the first thing just because a team doesn't make it past a certain... Like, can you imagine, like, how much longer would it have been than, like, in that respect, than all the years that John Cooper never won a Stanley Cup until 2021 or 2020 and 2021? that all the years he came close, it didn't matter how close. It didn't matter because he was not getting it done. That was where they stopped the progress. They might make a Stanley Cup final. They make the conference finals, but they don't win. So he got to go. Like, can you imagine if people talked like that about him? Or same thing, Colorado couldn't get past the second round. Well, Jared Bednar's probably not doing a very good job. We should get rid of him. Like, can you imagine if people?
I heard conversations about it that if they had lost in the second round again, Jared Bednar would have been on the hot seat.
And I think see it with the second round, but once you get past a certain point,
oh yeah, for sure. But I think with Barry Trotz on the market, I think Jared Bednar is absolutely in trouble if they go out in the second round again.
Right. Well, and obviously that's not a discussion we're having right now. But
Barry Trotz with Cale Makar, Devon Tate, Sam Girard, Bo and Byram. Oh my! Stop! It's not fair.
Right.
Okay.
Either way, all right. But either way, so handicapping this thing, because that's what you really asked me. I would say that if I had to pick the leader at the moment, it is probably Tortorella.
Okay, I agree.
That's my gut right now, because to me, there is one important factor, and for what it's worth, like I said, I don't really have a read on Cassidy, and the report that Anthony Sanfilippo put out there about DeBoer is kind of a new thing to me anyway. That was one of the names that just didn't come up much, period. That was so. A lot of teams are making certain I won't say certain information, but a lot of teams are making their coaching searches some of the best kept secrets on the planet right now.
Yeah, it's a very secretive market.
Because I think the only thing that's not a secret is that everybody's waiting on Barry Trotz. Nobody's really discussing the contingency plan if Trotz doesn't pick your team.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But this is the thing. So the only other name that I've gotten really good intel on outside of Trotz is Tortorella. And basically, the reason there's two reasons why I think that he's the leader. Number one is that obviously he's this far into the process anyway. So the fact that his name keeps coming up means he's a serious candidate.
God, I'm so mad Jake Voracek's not here anymore, because him and Tort screaming at each other would have been gold. Sorry.
But the second reason why I believe that he's quite possibly leading this process is because of the fact that, have you heard his name come up at all when it comes to anybody else? And again, people are keeping stuff close to the vest. I get that.
I think people know Chuck Fletcher has dibs.
Because, well, it's not that I don't want to call anybody dibs on anything, but I will say this. Tortorella does, from what I've been told anyway, and Sanfilippo said this on the latest Snow the Goalie as well, so this is, I'd heard the
fairly
same
well
thing,
sourced.
but I'd heard the same thing, that Tortorella wants the job.
Right.
He actually wants to coach the Philadelphia Flyers. In their current state, he still wants to do it.
Man. Well, and I think, and I didn't mean literal dibs, but I think it's been made known that Chuck Fletcher has put his best foot forward when it comes to conversations with John Tortorella.
And let's be clear, because I'm sure and you're not really on Twitter all that much, but John Butchergrass has been putting out the picture of
Yep, I saw the Tortorella Gritty picture. Yep,
and he's done it twice now,
and he was right the first time.
Well, he's doing it because of the fact that this is serious. I don't know that he's doing it because of anything else, but you know what? The other part of the equation is that if anybody's going to find out anything, don't you think it's the people who work directly with him on a regular basis? Come on. I don't think that that's just being done. There definitely isn't that. Look, there's an.
They might have had a conversation about it.
But listen, there's an element of that being done because it's real, but there's also an element being done because it's a troll.
It's Tortorella, right?
No, because it's a troll job. Because
sure,
Butchergrass as a broadcaster knows how Philly fans are going to react to something like that. So of course you're egging it on a little bit. Come on.
Well, and I would be absolutely stunned if Tortorella wasn't in on it. That's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Because they're having a ball with it. I can't wait to hear what John Tortorella has to say about Carter Hart. Oh, here we go.
I mean, like I said, I don't want to. If you want me to put percentages on stuff, and I'm getting a lot closer now, I have to reconsider a little bit because the DeBoer thing changes things a little bit for me.
I'm willing to put him in the 40% range.
I was willing to give for Tortorella. I was willing to go 50-50 shot.
Wow,
that's how serious I was feeling about
Torts versus the field.
I think Tortorella is a 50-50. I think that Trotz is probably about a 20-25 right now simply because he holds the keys
on him.
to it.
Right.
the team is definitely interested here.
I think the Flyers' odds are lower than you think they are. Why would Barry Trotz want to come to Philadelphia? Like he's got he's got more money than God. Like he's fine.
But for what it's worth, like there are other, like, no offense to Mike Vellucci, but I don't even know if I give Vellucci a percentage.
I agree. Because, I think he's lumped in with the field. Like back in the day when you could bet on the PGA and you could bet on Tiger, Phil, or the field.
Oh yeah. I get your point.
It's Barry, John, or the field.
But no, I'm not even going that far with it because, like, to me, I mean, maybe if you want to play 25% the field or 30% the field with DeBoer and the other two with Tocchet and Vellucci, then go right ahead, I guess, and Cassidy, I guess, too, in the realm of possibilities, but. I kind of lean towards this. I don't want to completely rule out the field, but that's why I kind of sit there and say Trotz for me is a 25 almost, because I kind of almost want to sit here and say it's 25% Trotz, 50% Torts, and 25% whatever's left, because I kind of lean towards this being a 2-horse race right now.
I agree. Well, speaking of 2-horse races, the NHL playoffs are finally down to a 2-horse race. I think that was about the best transition I could possibly do. Yeah, we're gonna
segue.
Yeah. So let's start with the series that ended the quickest. What do you say?
It's a great place to start because I don't. I was gonna say we don't have a lot to talk about with it, but I think there's actually a lot to talk about with it because
I feel so atrocious for Connor McDavid.
Why? Because they won't get him a legitimate goaltender.
Because they won't get him a legitimate goaltender. They won't get him a winger. They won't get him a second line center because they keep putting Leon Draisaitl on his wing. They can't get him more than one good defenseman. I legitimately believe that Connor McDavid could have and probably should have signed a max contract for $14+ million, and I think he cut the team a break by only getting a 12.5 or 12.25, whatever his number is. You have to support him more than you have.
I think that more than ever this year, Connor McDavid showed how good he is in terms of
freaking good,
but not in terms of the offensive skill. Like, I think he showed how good he can be at both ends legitimately. Like, you can make it like. It's a thing for the Oilers to be able to, like, it should really be a thing to hang their hat on here, that the Oilers can sit here and say, with Connor McDavid and with Leon Draisaitl on one foot, you can get to the Western Conference Final. That's massive for your team's overall development. Now you need to go out there and actually supplement this whole thing.
Connor McDavid, during these playoffs, put himself, in my eyes, in my opinion, leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the league. Whoever you think the second best player in the world is, whether you think it's Sidney Crosby or Leon Draisaitl or Cale Makar or Igor Shesterkin, take out Shesterkin, goalies are weird. Whatever skater you think is the second best player in the world, Connor McDavid could play circles around him in his sleep effortlessly. He did things during this playoff run that put him in a conversation with 99 and 66, and that's it. And in some cases, just with 99. He is so infinitely much better than the rest of the league that it's not fair. The kid's a cheat code.
There was a great article about his speed where they talked to many different players. I mean, I believe that the names that were in that article were guys like, Hall of Fame names like Mike Gartner, Mike Modano, Paul Correa. Like, they talked to legend. Paul Coffey was in it as well as a defenseman, talking about the fact that basically the thing that separates McDavid from the field is that, yes, there are guys who can skate as fast as he can, maybe even faster without the puck. But he does not lose speed when he gets it.
Right.
And that's usually what separates one from the rest. He is that fast and can move that fast while controlling the play, as opposed to just being the guy who moves that well without it.
Right.
And that's the biggest, that's the biggest difference. But the bottom line still comes down to, you can't do it all yourself.
No. Not in hockey. You just can't.
And, when you get a team that you're playing against that has the depth that Colorado does, for sure. I mean, I don't want to sit here and act like Colorado's depth is probably, the best in the league completely, because I think we're going to talk about a team that's got depth that's probably better than Colorado's on paper. But
okay.
But they're up there. I mean, they're easily top 5, maybe, probably top 3 in terms of overall depth. I'm saying there might be somebody better than Colorado in terms of depth. I think one of the teams that's, the other team that's left has something to say about that. And yet there, there's not a reliance on the star players is what I'm trying to get at. Like, Edmonton so relies on, McDavid's got to show up in a big way, and Draisaitl's got to show up in a big way, and that can that help other players? Absolutely, it can. That's what makes Zach Hyman look as good as he did, and that's what makes Evander Kane have the series that he did, or the playoff that he did. But for other guys, at some point in time, you're also playing on a line where they're not involved in things, or not playing on a power play, and eventually you need more than just that. Did you notice what happened when Edmonton was down a forward, so they were kind of shuffling things around, and next thing you know, McDavid and Draisaitl can make anybody better.
Yes.
To the point where Zach Kassian scoring a game-tying goal in a game like that, that's high scoring, back and forth, crazy amounts of goals in the third period, and Zach Kassian's the one who's scoring. They've set up tons of people,
Yep.
But it was not coming with the same, it just doesn't come with the same level. I'm not hearing, hey, who scored a couple goals tonight, or who had a really big game? Warren Fogle or Derek Ryan.
They disappeared.
Because it was, I think, based on the depth of Colorado, it became easier to mask those guys. For other teams, that may have been a problem, but not for Colorado, and that's the difference. So Colorado, just across the board,
I do want to talk about them.
They have that big line at the top already, which now, certainly given, first of all, obviously they're here, so I think this makes the argument stronger, but Florida had a really good top line this year.
Yep.
And it faded in the playoffs.
Yep.
And we've already talked about Boston's top line kind of being a little bit in shambles at the moment, just with a lot of things. So I would say the best line in hockey right now, the McKinnon, Landeskog, Rantanen trio.
I agree.
Just seems to be able. What was really telling about the whole thing to me was Game 4. Because in Game 4, you couldn't even play that top line. Nope. You had to switch it up, and you put Mikko Rantanen at center because Nazem Kadri was not able to play.
Yep. And
it didn't do a thing
to
your production. You were still as good as you were the day before.
That team, I know that team doesn't necessarily have the depth of, among their forward core of maybe the Lightning and some of these other teams that we've kind of talked about.
Right.
Where they make up for that is that their defense, 1-6, is stellar.
Do you want to know something funny about the clinching game?
Okay.
It wasn't, by the standards of the way the lineup actually was presented, which had Rantanen on the second line centering as opposed to the first line right wing slot.
Right.
But let's assume that that's the way, because we know it as that, right? We know Rantanen with McKinnon and Landeskog. So traditionally, if you're going to start the top line, your starting lineup was Landeskog, McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, and Devon Toews. And those 5 players scored the first 5 goals of the game for Colorado.
Talk about top line production.
Each one of them individually made their own mark on the whole thing. Makar especially, because Makar was... This is the thing about Makar and Toews that makes a difference. You can only get so much out of... truthfully, you can only get so much out of Landeskog, McKinnon, and Rantanen on a line together because of the fact that they play a chunk of time together.
Sure. There's only one puck.
Right. No, it changed in Game 4 because in Game 4, Rantanen moved to another line. So now they're separated, but it's still the same premise outside of power plays.
Yep.
That's the only time when they're all on the ice together. But you still, again... On a power play, you get a minute, maybe a minute and a half, depending on how well they're doing with possession. And
they're a good enough unit that they're going to play a minute 40 on most power plays. Let's be honest.
It just depends. To me, it all comes down to whenever the other team clears the puck.
Fair enough, but they're not changing it a minute most of the time.
They're usually giving it one more shot, and if they get stopped at the blue line, then they're switching it up. And if not, they can gain entry and stay out there. At even strength, that gets trimmed probably by about 15 seconds at least. So you're talking 45 seconds, maybe a minute max, but like usually a minute's reserved for your defenseman. So the big catalyst here is that top defensive pairing, because the fact that you can put them with anybody.
Yep.
It's not as exclusive. Like, it doesn't go the other direction. The forwards, who, like, when you put them with any defensive pairing, they're still the same skill level forwards they are, and their goal is still to provide offense while, you know, guys have certain responsibilities to be better defensively, obviously, but it's not the same thing. Notice how, though, when it got to overtime, that when Arturi Lekkonen's scoring the game-winning goal, the defense pairing that's on the ice for that particular shift is Taves and Makar.
Yep.
So that this way, your two best defensemen are out there now with a line that is not your top line.
Yep.
Now we're doing something different. It changes the way things are, and this is how Makar seems to come and emerge more.
That's it.
Because
right.
He's out there more often, playing more minutes, and playing with more guys than these other forwards are.
And you can't do that with all defensemen. Like, you can't even do that with, theoretically, there are 64 top pairing defensemen in the NHL. You can't do that with 50 of them.
Right.
Like, it's a very small percentage of players that you can just say, hey, listen, we don't care when you're out there. We trust you. And Cale Makar plays very responsibly defensively. He's been excellent defensively. Is it too soon to make comparisons to prime Erik Karlsson?
I don't know if it's too soon to make comparisons to that.
Because that's the kind of command he has over the game. Like, watching Erik Karlsson in 2016 take the Senators to the Eastern Conference Finals essentially on one leg, and that's the kind of performance we've gotten out of Cale Makar this offseason. He has been incredible.
First of all, so there's 2 points I want to make about this. One is about Colorado's team as a whole, but I want to stick to Makar for a second because Makar is part of a discussion that I think is going to be relevant for a really long time and is going to stir up discussions like nobody's business for the next decade probably.
Okay.
Because you're at a point right now where the answer to who's the best defenseman in the game has multiple answers.
Yep.
Like, I don't know who the best defenseman in the Stanley Cup Final is this year. That's how much of a debate it is. Because the guy who's the big name on the other side of Colorado in the Stanley Cup Final has a case.
And it's crazy. If you don't know who won the Eastern Conference Finals, that's not a spoiler. Quite frankly, because both Adam Fox and Victor Hedman are in that conversation, frankly.
And realistically speaking, I mean, there's more that you can add to that. I mean, Colorado played one of them on their way here because Roman Yossi's going to be in that discussion for a long time. And, you know, you can do this with...
Probably not as long as the other guys.
Well, then, see, but in that respect, then neither is Hedman because Hedman and Yossi are going to be on that same page. Like, Fox and Makar are the two big guys that are the next. Like, do you know what this is?
Yeah.
This is so Victor Hedman and Roman Yossi are Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin, and Adam Fox and Cale Makar are Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews. Okay. There's going to come a point where, like, right now, all four are involved, and they're all going to be talked about among the best, right?
To be fair, I think the difference between Yossi and Hedman and why I think Hedman will hold up better than Yossi does is just simply because Hedman has a much better team around them. And Yossi is very likely to fall off a cliff, and he's a big part of the reason why Nashville was as decent as they are this year.
But the reason I keep going back to, or not keep going back to this, but the reason why I'm calling it like that is because Crosby and Ovechkin, as great players, are still on the back nine of the playing career.
Right.
And I would say that Yossi and Hedman are the same because even if they're you can even put them on the younger side. You can sit there and say, hey, listen, a guy's 30 years old, doesn't matter. You're a defenseman. You're getting in the way of shots. You're more likely to get hurt.
You play more minutes.
Well, and here's the thing about it. The end sometimes is not pretty, even for Hall of Fame caliber players. Look at Zdeno Chara. Like, sometimes the end is not very pretty, but, you know, it is what it is. Then you've got this next wave like Matthews and McDavid where you sit here and you go, like, listen, we're going to be talking about Adam Fox and Cale Makar for the next 15 years.
They're so exciting.
And there could be more behind them. Like, who knows who else we're going to talk about in that same in that same vein, but like those
Cam York,
guys,
baby.
I mean,
probably not, but we can dream.
That wasn't the Michigan defenseman that I kind of was thinking could enter that conversation maybe a few years down the road. I mean, it's way too soon to tell if Owen Power enters that discussion, but like, certainly as a guy who went first overall, though, you gotta give it some consideration. Hedman was a number 2 pick, by the way.
Yeah, we gotta temper our expectations when it comes to Buffalo development.
I hear you, but Hedman was a 2nd overall pick. Makar was a 4th. Like, guys who get drafted high can turn into exactly what they are expected to become, and maybe that's the case. Like, I think Owen Power's too young for me to jump the gun on him yet. I don't feel like Rasmus.
Well, then maybe you can go with Rasmus Dahlin. Oh wait,
has not emerged quite like a number 1 pick.
That's why I said we got to temper our expectations when it comes to Buffalo.
But a lot of these playoff teams have that guy. You know what I mean? Like, if you're a team in the playoffs, you've got a guy like this. He's probably not as good as the 4 that we're talking about the most, but you've got a guy like Miro Heiskanen or John Carlson or Charlie McAvoy or, like the list keeps going on. You know where I'm going with this? But it's funny
Jacob
how
Slavin.
Slavin's really good.
And he plays with Brent Pesce. That pair is so good.
Carolina has probably done the best job of any team to take guys who you don't expect to be like. They're not superstar defensemen, but they are incredible. Like, they are very, very good in terms of like consistency. Yes. They don't do anything super special other than just play a consistent game. And yet the funny thing that I'm getting at with this is that, okay, so we've already praised Colorado with Makar and all that stuff. I haven't mentioned a single Oilers defenseman yet.
Man, Darnell Nurse was not good in this series.
Now, Darnell Nurse also was playing with a bad hip.
I understand.
So when the injuries hit, it is what it is. I get that. But my issue with Darnell Nurse is never going to be what he's capable of doing. I think he is a very good defenseman. I don't think he's worth the money he's going to start getting on this next contract, and that's the problem I'm always going to have, is that somehow or other he's going to make that kind of money and not be worth it.
Correct.
That's the thing. I said on the last show we did, I think Evan Bouchard is going to become a really good defenseman because he's shown me something. Now, he had a moment in this series. I forget what game it was, but he absolutely got schooled on a play.
Right. Well, and the problem is eventually you're going to have to pay him.
You will, yeah.
And you're like the Oilers are 2 years away from just imploding on their salary cap.
The Oilers have nice, what I would call they have nice defensemen in terms of Nurse is in that conversation. Nurse is very good.
Yeah, I think Nurse is very good.
And it's not like you can take the rest and say there's not serviceable players. Like Duncan Keith was still serviceable in the playoffs, but he's on the back 9, and then Bouchard and Tyson Barrie they're nice defensemen. They're nice pieces, but are they your number 1s? No.
If you're starting a team from scratch, current contract in hand, Darnell Nurse or Ivan Provorov?
I mean, what Nurse is going to be making is extreme, and that's the problem. I would probably take Provorov because you know what?
But you hesitated. It was tough.
No, I'll tell you what made it the deciding factor for me, because I know you're sitting here saying starting a team with.
Right.
But let's just say it's an expansion draft, and you're literally playing this or that with me.
Okay.
And I'll take Provorov's contract.
Because it's easier to move.
No, because it's, you know what? That becomes my number 2, and I go, okay, that's a number 2 defenseman for me.
Fair.
Done. I value Nurse almost the same way. Like, I don't know if Nurse is completely a number 1, even though he gets paid like one. I know why people think he is.
I think he's a 1B.
It's very close. I want to go back to the Avs and Makar for a second because I want to go back to what you said, because you're right. All 6 of them have been really good in the playoffs, these 6 defensemen. And I'm going to say something that I never thought I would say when we do this show.
Okay.
Because I'm going to mention all the others first. So, I already said Devon Taves, who I think has been great for them.
He's been spectacular.
By the way, they're doing all of this without Sam Girard, who I also thought was really good all year. Add in the fact, Manson's been a great pickup for them. Obviously, he just fit straight in from the beginning.
Yep.
So they've got great defensemen. Eric Johnson has his moments. I think he's a perfect middle guy. All that stuff. You know who else is playing really well? And I hate to say it. I can't believe I'm going to say he's playing well. Jack Johnson even is a fit on this team.
Yep. He sure is.
I know that that's typically been a joke, but he really has played well.
Here's the thing: is Jack Johnson was never a bad defenseman. Jack Johnson was just never good enough to live up to the money he was getting.
I'd say he was just an overpaid defenseman. Is
right?
What you're saying?
It's like okay. I get the occasional grief for my feelings on Andrew McDonald. And I've always said if Andrew McDonald made 2, I wouldn't have had a problem with him. It's the fact that he was making $5 or $6 million to be an absolute pylon.
Now, obviously, Jack Johnson is only playing in the series because Girard is hurt and he's the next one up. Because the other name I haven't mentioned, who obviously, like, listen, this is it. Like, I should have said him way earlier than what I did because Bowen Byram is going to, like, Makar and Byram are going to terrorize teams for years to come because Byram is. I don't know if we can put anybody on the same level as Makar because Makar has been so good, but Byram is really good.
For such a gifted, creative, talented offensive player, Joe Sakic is really good at getting defensemen.
You know what? Some guys, one of the things I was told years ago in a press box was that there are guys some guys are really good players, even great players, Hall of Fame level players, and they just don't make great coaches. Right.
We've seen Wayne Gretzky in Arizona.
And we've seen Patrick Waugh in Colorado.
Right.
Like, sometimes it happens.
I still think he's going to get another shot one day, but that's just
Patrick Waugh's coaching in juniors right now.
Yeah, he'll get another shot in the show.
But, sometimes that lends to which lends to the other side of the conversation, which is why you get, ex-players who you don't even realize are ex-players. Let's play this game. Let's wait. Bruce Cassidy.
I was going to say Bruce Cassidy.
Right.
Perfect example.
Bruce Cassidy was one of them. You know who else you can go to? There was another one I was thinking of, and I'm losing it that quickly just because we were going on.
Barry Trotz wasn't a player, was he?
I believe he might have been at some point, but ages ago. But, man, it was a guy who was in a role. Like, he was a role player who turned out to be a brilliant coach because now it's escaping me that quickly, and this is bothering me because it's somebody who was easy. Oh, you know who used to play? Now I know who it is because he just got knocked out. Gerard Gallant.
Okay.
Yes, he's an ex-player. Yes. But do you even think about that? You don't think, hey, the guy had a great playing career. No. Nobody talks about that part, but he's one of Jack Adams. He's a great coach. Like, that's the stuff that happens. You know what I mean? So.
All right. So back to the playoffs here. We got Avalanche over the Oilers in a sweep.
Yep. But you're right. Like, Joe Sakic has done a great job with this team and the development and all that. And by the way, if for all you former Flyer watchers out there, Nick Ove-Kubel has got a shot at a Stanley Cup.
There you go. And there's a couple on the other side too.
And by the way, one more point on the Colorado Avalanche before we move to the other series, because let's not forget that they did this in this series with their backup goaltender.
Yep.
So
insane.
Now, I do want to say that was starting to look a little shaky in Game 4 because that was kind of that wild back-and-forth style game and all that stuff. And there was a lot of speculation that
But
Kemper
the Lightning
was going to
play that game.
No, but there was a lot of speculation that Kemper was going to start a Game 5 if there was one.
Right. So he should be good to go with several days off.
Leads me to believe he's playing Wednesday, yes.
All right. So jumping over to the other side of the bracket, the team that they'll be playing on Wednesday. You know what's great?
What's great?
Sad Rangers fans.
Oh.
And Game 5 was full of them, man. And honestly, so was Game 6. The Tampa Bay Lightning went down 2-0 in the first 2 games of this series and then decided that was enough of that. And rattled off 4 straight. And I say rattled off. They weren't dominant. They were close games. Igor Shesterkin... It's not going to happen, but Igor Shesterkin should get some Conn Smythe votes. He deserves them, even though he only played in 75% of the playoffs.
You know what? I don't think when they vote for that, because they do it I think they do it as the final goes along.
Yeah.
So I don't think they ever include anybody who doesn't make the final.
I agree.
Now, obviously, we had that discussion that, on the other side, if Edmonton would have made the final, McDavid's doing what he's doing, is there a shot he wins the thing without winning the cup because it was that remarkable of an overall playoff.
If the Rangers had gotten through, Shesterkin would be in the same conversation, and we would be sitting here on this show making comparisons to Jean-Sébastien Giguère.
Yeah, well, I think so. I hear you.
We'd be doing it.
So let's start with this. Remember how many goals the Tampa Bay Lightning allowed in the series against Florida?
3 goals in 4 games, right?
Yes. Okay. So the New York Rangers came out in Game 1 and doubled that immediately.
Right.
Which all of a sudden made you think, oh, wow, okay, totally different series, totally different team you're playing against. It is only 1 game, but nonetheless, right?
I think I know where you're going with this, and it's going to make me very happy.
And then it happened, and I would say again, but it happened in Game 2 because you get 3 goals by him and you win a game. Because
Andrei Vasilevsky looked human.
Yes.
Which is something he very rarely looks. I don't know if you've seen him. He's all bug-eyed and stuff. But
I hear. Well, and I want to go back to here's something very important about Game 2.
Rangers fans chanting Igor's better?
No, it's not that.
And Andrei Vasilevsky deciding that's enough of that now.
So the Lightning scored first in Game 2, and the Rangers answered with 2 goals in the second. In the rest of the period, took the 2-1 lead to the second. Didn't give up a goal in the second either, so it was still 2-1 at the end. And came out and scored a minute 21 into the third period, which to me means everything. When you already have Tampa Bay vulnerable,
right,
you have to finish the job.
You got him on the ropes.
And you can make it an uphill battle by doing things exactly like that, which is scoring early in a period. Game 1 was only 4-2 at the end of the second period. It's not impossible for a team like Tampa Bay, who's been there, done that, this is nothing, to say 1 goal and it's a different game and they've got 15 minutes left, maybe even 10 minutes left to get the other one that ties it up if they're playing better in the third period. Right. When you go out and score in the first minute and make it 5-2 instead of 4-2, though, you just change the whole dynamic. Now you're in more control and you're hitting them where it hurts and, not letting them get back up when you've knocked them down, right? So they win, again, that goal kind of sets the tone. And after they scored 3 goals on them in Game 2, after scoring 6 in Game 1, they scored 5 total goals for the rest of the series. Because, you had a situation here where, and again, what's the difference? Go to Game 3, you go up 2-0 on power play goals, and yes, Tampa Bay gets 1 back, but you've got 1 period left, and the one thing that you couldn't do was give them life. And it was not that Tampa Bay tied the game. That's not the problem. That game needed to get to overtime.
Yep.
And it didn't. And when it didn't get to overtime, we had a series again.
And not only did it not get to overtime, Andre Palat scores with 42 seconds left and crushes the Rangers. You're 42 seconds from getting to overtime, and if you get to overtime, Igor Shesterkin might be able to steal you a game. And if he steals you a game, you're up 3-0, and you're so close. You're right there. You're in sudden death. And Andre Palat just tears it to shreds in front of your eyes.
Right, I think that fully influenced the way that Game 4 went. Because Game 4 was a 3-0 game for most of the night. Or, well, it was 1-0, then 2-0, then 3-0. And at 3-0, to me, game over. At 2-0, it felt like game over, to be honest. But at 3-0, it was really game over because it's early third. You're not scoring 3 goals on Vasilevsky in the period.
Not in Tampa.
Right. The other games were different. The last 2 games were very different. Actually, the fact that the Rangers took the lead in Game 5 makes a huge difference as well, because you're going, hey, look what happened. And when the game gets tied like it did, this is almost a repeat of Game 3. Because when it's 1-1, again, you can't panic off of that. But as the closing stages are hitting, they really needed that game to get to overtime. Just because at some point in time, look, maybe it happens to you as the team that that you are, that's trying to win the game, like you're the Rangers. Maybe it happens to Tampa, but somebody's going to make a mistake that leads to a big chance because the fatigue starts to set in at some point. You're playing more than just the 5-minute standard at the end of the game, and you've been playing for a long time. We've already talked about how Tampa Bay's played more hockey in the last 3 years than anybody else has. So surely there's a possibility that, a mistake happens or something like that. And again, here comes the goal with 1:50 left, and it's crushing because now you have to scramble into the situation where it feels like it's already over. And go to game 6. You're down 1-0. You get the tying goal. There are under 6 minutes to go, or under 7 minutes to go. There's 6 minutes and 53 seconds left, and you're like, there it is. Tie game, not dead yet. You got a shot to win this game late or in overtime.
And then as soon as you breathe your sigh of relief, they punch you in the chest and knock the air out of you.
And the last thing that you want to do against this team is chase them.
Yep.
You do not want to chase the Tampa Bay Lightning. And to me, one of the big things, this is at least from my evaluation of the way that the Rangers played this series. After game 2, and I don't know if this has to do with, because game 3 they had a lead, obviously, and Tampa then pulled it out. So maybe after that game, I'll say instead. But certainly in the last 3. They were so busy looking for the perfect play, passing a lot more than they were before. I get it. What won you the first 2 games is you had the cross-ice passes available to you. You were able to go whatever way you wanted to. Vasilevsky had to do a lot of traveling across the crease to make saves, and he couldn't make all of them, so you scored 9 goals in 2 games. And then after that, it was like you tried to get too cute, too perfect, and there's no time for that with a team that has total buy-in to what is supposed to be done, which is go and block shots, get in the way of everything, hit people off the puck, don't give them time and space. And it creates a situation where you don't have the luxury of playing perfect.
Right.
And that is Tampa Bay Lightning hockey as we've come to know it. And as we shift gears to the overall, let's talk about the final as we wrap up.
Well, and the other thing I wanted to mention about Tampa is that we talked about the depth scoring out of Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
And who does it better than Tampa Bay? You're getting clutch goals out of Corey Perry, Patrick Maroon. Did Zach Bogosian score a goal at some point here in the series?
Bogosian set up Maroon because he he danced Justin Braun.
Right. Thanks, Justin. We appreciate the sabotage, bud. But it just as dangerous as Stamkos, Kucherov, and Point, who, by the way, should return for the final at some point, though maybe not game 1. As much as dangerous as their big guys are, look out, man, because Alex Killorn's going to kill you. Anthony Cirelli is going to kill you. Andre Palat's going to kill you. Anybody. They dress 18 skaters. 18 of them can hurt you.
I've got to say, based off of everything, because to me, when it counted the most, their big guys were the ones that showed up and did it. Game 3, you're down 2-0 in game 3, 2-0 in the series to that point, and the goals are Kucherov, Stamkos, and then Palat off of a play that involves Hedman and Kucherov.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that when it comes to listen, hey, you're part, and Palat's only playing at that position because Point's not there.
As far as guys in the lineup who can kill you, who can score the late goal, who can put the dagger in 21 seconds after you score the tire, they're 18 for 18. Just the entire roster, all of them. And if Andrei Vasilevsky shot more, he'd probably be just as dangerous.
But you having game 4, you have a situation. Maroon scores first from Bogosian and Belmar, and then
Flyers watch Pierre-Edouard Belmar, baby. This series also features Brian Elliott,
the best bench door opener there is, right? Because he's not getting into a game.
You know what? He'll bench door open for the guy who brings out the cup at the end of it all.
That's right.
That's all that matters.
He'll bench door open as best he can to get a ring on his finger, right?
And say, thank you very much, Mr. Cooper and Mr. Stamkos, sir.
And Mr. Breezeball for signing me.
Yep.
And,
all of them.
Kucherov had the second goal of game 4, Stamkos, and then Palat into an empty net. So, that one's, again, kind of big guys thing. Mikhail Sergachev ties game 5, shoots the puck on the shot that goes in off of Palat, and then Brandon Hagel getting a goal into an empty net to ice it. It comes from across the board. And usually the thing about their depth is never – I don't want to make this about goal scoring because that's not what it's about. It's the fact that they don't miss a beat with those guys. when Maroon's on the ice with Bellemare and Hagel's out there, and you go, same thing. It was the same thing that we said when you go, and Cirelli's really good in the 2C role, so I don't want to make it seem like he's bottom six. But this team's had to reconstruct their bottom six more times than you can imagine because of guys who come in and leave, and you've got Corey Perry down there who has,
they replaced their whole third line this year.
Right. You got Corey Perry down there who we've said multiple times, was the ultimate. If you can't beat him, join him, because for 2 years he couldn't, and now you're trying to, and it's So we'll see what happens. But.
So let's shift gears toward the Stanley Cup Final. Now we have the Colorado Avalanche and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Man, okay. Before we break down this series, simple answer.
Okay.
Right now, with this series still pending, are the Tampa Bay Lightning already a dynasty? Because my answer is yes, for the record.
I don't think you will ever see
3 appearances with 2 wins in 3 years, you're already there. If you win the third one, cement it.
Okay, let's do it this way. Short answer. I'll say yes also, but short answer, and is yes. Reason is, so they're in a cup final this year. Past 2 years, they won the whole thing. The year before that was conference finals, and the year before that was the
Columbus sweep.
Columbus sweep with the President's Trophy. More wins than any modern era. Definitely more wins than any salary cap era team.
That was their version of the 2010 Bruins blowing the 3-0 lead to the Flyers.
Okay, so then the 2 years before that, both conference finals. The year before that, cup final, and losing. Where will you ever find your only first round exit or pre-second round exit was a year where you won 62 games.
John Cooper will hands in his pockets whistle walk into the Hall of Fame whenever he decides to. Hello?
If he could retire tomorrow and they would hand it over
and,
at that
and
point.
We talked about this on a recent show. The one year they missed the playoffs, Steven Stamkos just got horrifically injured.
Right. So, that's what I'm getting at. So it wasn't all in a row, but, you're going back to basically John Cooper's entire tenure almost.
Yep.
And they've got, at this point in time, as we sit here speaking about it, they've got 2 cup final appearances, 1 pending, but 1 that was a loss. 2 Stanley Cup wins, which means that's 2 more finals appearances. So they've been to the cup finals 4 times under John Cooper, which is already dynasty level as it is.
Right.
They've been 1, and the conference final losses that we're talking about aren't just conference final losses. They were 1 win away in those. So you're talking about a 1-win difference between 6 Stanley Cup final appearances since 2015.
Insane.
It's only 2022, so we're talking an 8-year span. In 8 years, they've been that close to 6 Stanley Cup final appearances and maybe winning in 3 of them and then doing it in a row, which hasn't happened since 1980 to 83.
Right. It's absolutely absurd what they've done. And we've talked about the 11-round win or 10-round or 11-round round win streak.
Right. Now, I do want to clear something up because I know already that inevitably you're going to ask me who you got later on.
I'm going to, yeah, but I think we're saving that right for the end.
No, we are. I'm not giving an answer. That's what I'm saying. But I want to make clear that I don't have a rooting interest in because they've won the last 2 years, I don't want them to win. I really don't care who wins this series. It's either gonna here's the thing you're gonna get with this Stanley Cup Final. It's either going to be Colorado's time after being a team that everybody thought was going to do it for the last. It's very much Tampa-like. Hey, Tampa's so good. How come they haven't won a cup yet? Now they finally have for the last 2 years. Colorado's almost in the same boat. How come this team with these guys can't get past the second round? It seems like it should be, So it's either going to be that or you're going to get the three-peat that hasn't happened in almost 40 years.
Right.
So...
Okay, so I got one for you before we set up the who you got question, because we will talk about that. For each team, who gets the first cup pass?
Oh, all right. Well,
so let's break down our candidates. Tampa, basically at this point, you're going with the guys who are new because everyone else kind of had their shot already. You might see Brian Elliott pretty high on that list. You might see.
You're making. First of all, in fairness, I do need to pull up a roster just to kind of look over.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, let's put it this way: for starters, Stamkos gets it if it's Tampa because we obviously know.
I'm talking about the first cup pass because we have established captains.
No, I know, but I'm trying to do it for Colorado side because we know Stamkos starts with it for Tampa. Landeskog starts with it for Colorado, who already is one of those been around a really long time kind of things.
Right.
So that's that already has an interesting wrinkle to it because again, you kind of wonder.
There are some crazy questions in Colorado because you have Erik Johnson, you have Nathan MacKinnon, you have. I mean, you're not going to give it to one of the young kids because you figure that they got time at this point. But, I mean...
as I go over Tampa, I'm trying to answer the question now.
Yeah.
Because as I go over Tampa, because they just won it last year, there's a lot of guys who came back. It's not, as I'm going through, it's not Belmar, Cirelli, or Colton, or Killorn, or Kucherov, or even, Maroon, it would be 4 in a row. I kind of think there could be a wrinkle to that just because everybody knows he's going for 4 in a row. So he could be... I would throw him into the mix just because, maybe it's Maroon. Riley Nash is new to them, right?
Yeah, but he's not a big enough name that he's going to get it first.
You don't know, though. I mean, when Chicago won it and it was Tiemanen's first, even though Tiemanen was an all-star before, I don't think he was the biggest name on the team by any stretch, and yet he still.
That's different. If you remember, that was the year he didn't play, and he had just gotten medically cleared, and he got traded before he played, and he got traded with a heart-wrenching backstory, full-blown Lifetime movie tragic backstory.
Okay, Nick Paul is new. That's a little interesting, but I think
Brian Elliott gets it before any of these guys.
Do you think it's Elliott, or do you think it's going to be? Because again, I'm looking at the defenseman. By the way, Bogosian got traded there last year, so he was on the team. Yep. Chernak's been there the whole time. Hedman, McDonough, Ruda, Sergachev. They've all. Cal Foot's a kid, so it probably won't be him.
Screw him.
So again, this is if you're picking a guy who's never won it before, I think it's got to be Brian.
I think it's Moose.
But if you're picking a guy who's a veteran, like I said, there's the only 2 other ones I can go with are you either give it to Maroon first because it's a 4 in a row and it's already a story, or you give it to Corey Perry.
Oh, Corey Perry's a good one. Okay.
Because Corey, for all I know, Corey Perry could get handed that cup this year after all of this and say, you know what, I'm done.
I think there's a real chance he does that, especially because
considering that his long
Getzlaf did it. That's what I'm saying. I think he gets to hold the ring up, kiss it, and walk into the sunset. I agree.
So let's go to Colorado.
In Corey Perry fashion, by the way, with the ring size to fit his middle finger, because obviously.
That's great.
Colorado. So Nathan MacKinnon, Erik Johnson.
So Landeskog gets it first, and I do think that there is an element where handing it straight off to MacKinnon makes a lot of sense.
They
are paired together. Yeah. Now, if you're going to go with the long-term, been around a while, never won it before kind of thing, I think you have a case with Erik Johnson's a really good one because you do have a case with that.
Yep.
You have a case with Jack Johnson.
You have a case with
Did Jack Johnson win it with Pittsburgh though?
If it was, I'm not sure. If it was this group's second cup, I would say okay. If it was this group's second cup, I would say you have a shot to go Erik Johnson or Jack Johnson rather. The fact that it's their first cup, it's going to MacKinnon or Johnson first, one of the hometown guys.
Could be. Not okay, and then not long after then, just give me 1 second to browse.
Max Chaos, give it to Kadri. Let him flip Toronto fans off.
That would be funny. And Kadri's been around for a long enough time that
it's not crazy.
Kadri's been in the leagues. He made his debut in 2009-2010, played a game, and then started to become more of a regular. He really wasn't a regular until 2013, but he had been around. The guy's been playing for a long time.
He's got a resume, yeah. And he managed to behave himself this playoff, so maybe that's his reward.
Certainly, if you're looking for guys who don't because again, I think MacKinnon's just such a natural at this point for this.
I'm almost thinking you get a Taves and Kane joint raise for Landeskog and MacKinnon. It really does seem like they're that. If Bergeron and Chara style, they really are a dynamic duo.
I do want to throw in a couple of other names just because there are some others that are interesting. Because Andrew Cogliano has never won a cup and has been around for a little while. He could certainly get it at least early. Now a guy who has won a cup but could get it really early as well is Darren Helm, because this could be
Darren Helm. Wow.
Think about it. Darren Helm, it could be close to the end. He's 35. Yep. Like Cogliano's in the same boat, by the way. Cogliano's 34.
Remember when Claude Giroux picked to go to the Florida Panthers for some reason? He could be here. We could be talking about him getting the Chemo Timonen raise. Like we could talk about him getting the get over here, Chemo. Come get it. Like, come on.
I hear you.
And by the way, if you tell me that you can watch that clip without tearing up a little bit, then you don't have a soul.
No, because in the moment when it happened, I was just grinning from ear to ear watch. I was just grinning from ear to ear watch.
Oh, I was sobbing.
Because what was better than come on over here and get it was he went to go and hand it off, and they turned around and grabbed him and they went, no, come on, Chemo, go for a skate.
Absolutely. But Jonathan Toews just turned around screaming at the top of his lungs right away. Fantastic.
But anyway, I would say those are I agree. Think you're right. Like, I think that maybe it just is so simple that if Colorado wins this thing, you start with Landeskog, who's going to have a good moment with it, very, very like Stamkos did a couple of years ago. Because I think Stamkos and Landeskog are in very similar positions where, like, it's been a while. You're finally in this spot like that. And for what it's worth,
I think McKinnon's going to have a while with it too.
Well, and for what it's worth, no matter who wins, those two are going to probably have a nice little moment when handshakes happen.
Absolutely.
Because Landeskog and Stamkos both knowing each other, both knowing how long each other has been there, like in the league.
I expect this series to get feisty. I expect this series to get physical. But I expect these teams to come out of this respecting each other, because I expect really high-end hockey.
And for what it's worth, too, just as I'm scrolling this list for Colorado, there's a lot of guys who are going, like, if Colorado wins, that are going to get the cup, that feel like they've been around for a really long time, but aren't really that old. Right. I want to say, like, they're like the first name that stood out to me in that respect is JT Compher. Like, it feels like Compher's been in the league forever. But 2017? No, let's see. Compher was 16-17. Yes, there you go.
Close enough.
Still, you're at 6 years realistically. Like, it feels like he's been around for a lot longer than that. And and this is another reason why he was drafted in 2013, so it took him a while to get here, kind of thing. Like,
hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Who you got?
Here it is. Well, I feel like I need to pull the curtain back as I make this thing. Because I deduct in my head, where it's going to go as the whole thing progresses. You put together the list of, like, based on, like, so when we did first round picks, all of those first round picks, I started to move to the next round and keep narrowing it down. So if you really want to know my original I'll start with this, because if you want to know my original on the East side, Florida was the team I had going to the Cup Final.
Me too.
And in fairness,
I had them playing Calgary too. My bracket was bad.
So, but in fairness, like, I believe that would have meant that I had Florida playing. Geez, eventually? Well, Tampa in the second round, but I think I narrowed it down where I think it would have been Florida, Carolina in the conference final. So I think because I always had Carolina and the Rangers. I think I picked wrong there, then picked wrong again with who was on the other side. So I was really wrong. I stopped being wrong when it was both of the wrong teams from the second round and picked Tampa Bay, because I'm like, I'm done with this thing. I had Tampa. Right. Oh, no. Hang on a second. I'm sorry. I had Florida beating Toronto in the second round.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which is why I made it a little easier, because I had Tampa getting knocked out in the first round, which was a stupid mistake on my
they almost did, man.
Well, they were vulnerable, yes.
The Leafs have given them their biggest test so far.
Right. So, anyway, I kind of stopped fooling around when it got to the conference final. I went, no. And dead on, hit it on the nose, Tampa in 6, even though Tampa lost the first 2 games. Which, by the way, what was that, 18 games in a row after a loss that they had won?
Yeah, something ridiculous.
It was a ridiculous streak that just came to an end.
The Rangers just ended it by winning the first 2 games of the Eastern Conference Finals.
Which was the high point for them of the series, because after that they did not win again. On the West side, I definitely made a mistake going, like, so I did not have St. Louis winning in the first round. I had Minnesota. That was a mistake. But I had Colorado winning in the second round and getting to the conference final. So the interesting part is that I had Colorado beating Minnesota in the second round, and St. Louis has so far been the team that has given them the biggest run for their money.
Absolutely.
Like, you are 5 seconds away from overtime in Game 6, and that could open up a whole new thing to begin with.
Yep.
I had the Calgary Edmonton or no, I didn't. I'm sorry. I had Calgary in LA, so I didn't have Edmonton getting there. Therefore, I had Calgary getting to the conference final against Colorado, and I did have Colorado going to the Cup final.
Okay.
So
are you sticking with that?
So hold on, because I originally had Colorado, Florida in the Cup final.
Right.
You still don't know who my original winner was yet, though.
Right. I'm sure it was probably Florida.
No, it was Colorado, actually.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, are you sticking with that?
Yes, I am. I do, for the record, this is not going to be a short series.
No.
I don't envision this. You know what? I was talking about this the other day.
Here's the thing. I could see it being 3-2 games, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from with that, for sure.
And it doesn't mean it's not going to be a blowout series in any way, shape, or form, but it might be a short series.
Well, Charlie O'Connor tweeted the other day, this is the perfect matchup, should be a really great series. Now, knowing that it'll be a 4-0 sweep.
Right. Tampa wins every game 6-0.
Right. Somebody sweeps. Well, it doesn't matter. It could be either side, but somebody sweeps it just because, right? No, I really do feel like it's going to be a long series. If the Rangers would have won in the conference final and advanced, given the way that I was if they would have found a way to somehow beat Tampa, but the way that they were going to have to do it down the stretch,
yep,
I probably would have said, you know what, the fact that Colorado's just sitting over here waiting, give me Colorado in 5, and it's not, this might not be a particularly close series because the Rangers don't defend as well as Tampa does.
Right.
So you take the high-octane offensive team and put them against the Rangers, and even though Shesterkin's a great goalie, I don't know that they survive that just because it's going to, only the reason they have a shot at surviving is because Tampa could do the same thing to them, and if they would have won that series somehow, you're going, well, if they got through Tampa, if they just follow the process through the Cup final, they might find a way to surprise everybody. And, so be it. But I don't envision that with these two teams because Tampa knows how to win. They know how to close out. They know exactly what they are doing. I just don't know that there's two things I don't know of. Number one is that, or not don't know, but there's two things I think change the game here. One is that the Rangers after game 2, I believe, only had one 5-on-5 goal for the rest of the series.
Right.
I don't think Colorado is going to have that kind of problem at 5-on-5 because because unlike the Rangers, who I think weren't really going to get a lot of the 5-on-5 stuff
I agree.
From anybody other than Zibanejad and Kreider and that kind of stuff. And they were always more equipped to do stuff on the power play too because we knew that. I think Colorado can score goals with Alex Newhook, Logan O'Connor, and Darren Helm on the ice the same way they can score with McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog on the ice.
That's fair.
I don't want to there's a good chance for both teams that somebody big is missing. You already alluded to Braden Point.
Right.
We kind of are left with the same thing on Nazem Kadri. So,
and I was actually going to say that's a great transition because my pick, and I don't have a problem saying this, I will give a definitive answer here, but my analytical answer is I think the winner is going to depend on who plays more games, Nazem Kadri or Braden Point.
That's a fair
I think the series is so close that whoever gets more out of those guys, it's going to be enough to make a difference.
Okay, that's fair.
And if Point comes back and looks pretty good and Kadri comes back and looks pretty good, I think it's going to be super duper close. And if one of them stays out and doesn't get back, I think that'll be enough to swing the momentum.
I don't want to tell you that you're completely off base with that because I think it's valid.
Right.
The only thing that's making me defend this or change this a little bit is I've been saying that about Tampa for two rounds now without Braden Point, thinking, listen, at some point in time, this might do them in. And certainly I got fooled into it a little bit with the way the Rangers started the series because you're going, are they going to have to drag Braden Point out here with whatever's going on just to try to find a way in this series? And they didn't have to.
Right. So I know you don't particularly follow MMA, but I'm going to deviate for just a second here.
Here we go.
Last night, Valentina Shevchenko defended her flyweight title, and she lost the first 2 rounds. I know one judge gave her the first. That was a bad call. She lost the first 2 rounds. Taylor Santos beat her. And in a 5-round fight, you saw Valentina Shevchenko go, okay, we're down 2 rounds. We can't afford to lose anymore. It's time to get on the gas. And she looked a little bit Rocky 3. A little bit complacent, a little bit, she knows, she's been the champion for a while. She looks a little complacent. Taylor Santos beat her in the first 2 rounds, and you saw her go, oh, we gotta turn up. It's a real day at the office.
Right.
And you saw the Tampa Bay Lightning do the same thing. They were a little bit rusty because they had a little time off after just absolutely dusting the Florida Panthers.
Right.
And you saw them be a little rusty, and the Rangers took advantage of that. And as they worked out that rust and as they got a little motivated because they got beat up a little bit, they went, all right, the 2-time defending champs are back.
Right.
And they took over the rest of that series, and I really think that was where they kicked the playoff run into high gear. Like, I know they torched Florida. Florida didn't look particularly good. Mm-hmm. They didn't look particularly good in the Toronto series. They struggled along with Toronto probably a lot more than they should have. Mm-hmm. I think the beast is awake.
So let me dive in there because that's a great place for me to jump in with something I want to say about this, because I think both teams realize the benefit that they have of playing with control, if you will. Tampa with Braden Point was able to do what they did, especially in this conference final, because of the fact that, okay, when you're down 2-0, yes, you're down, but you're not out at that point, and you do need to win a couple games. But once they tied the series up, and you've won the last 2 games without him, do you need to go that well in Game 5? No, not necessarily. And when you win Game 5 and you're up 3-2 and you're in control, like, that was the thing for me for the whole Florida series. They won Game 1. They damn near stole Game 2 because Game 2 it was a miracle at the end of the last second type stuff.
Crazy.
But when you're up 2-0, why go to that situation? Why even bother to attempt to bring him back until you need to, right?
Yep.
So
correct.
when it's 3-0 and then you're in a closeout position.
Now you're coasting.
But you don't even need to think about that. Like, of course you're going to let him sit out and heal up and keep going. And then he's still not ready for the next round. And you lose the first 2 games, but again, and once you get back in that position, like, if it would have gone 7, would he have played? That's debatable. It could have happened.
I think John Cooper's come out and said that he wasn't going to play no matter what.
Well, easy to say now, though.
Right. Yeah, well, sure.
I think that at the time of Game 6, he wasn't ruling things out.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
He's been very careful to not rule stuff out as the games go on, but I think that it's easy to say now, oh, yeah, he wasn't going to play then. He probably won't play in Game 1. You know why he's not going to play in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final? Because they don't need to go there yet. Because so when you're in control like that, again, so when they go up 3-2 and you have that Game 6, I don't want to speak for what would happen in Game 7 if it came to it, but in Game 6, you don't feel the need to do that.
Right.
When Darcy Kemper was out of the lineup for Colorado, and I believe he had missed at one point in time, he missed with the eye injury first.
Right.
But again, when you're playing, like, I believe it was at the end of the Nashville series. So when you're already up in the series looking at a sweep, is there any reason to be pressured into, hey, we really shouldn't play, backup here? Like,
right. Well,
of course you're going to do it.
And he did back up Pavel Francouz in Game 4 of the Western Conference Final. Like, he's back. He's good to go.
Right, but it comes down to that. If you don't have to force the issue, why bother?
Exactly.
Like,
and I think there's a real case that for the first time in several years, we have the 2 best teams in the league in the Stanley Cup Final.
So I'll tell you what I tweeted the other night because it falls in line with that. Because I even put the Stanley Cup Final will be what it should be. The back-to-back defending champs have the target on their back. The best team in the West gets their chance to dethrone them. It should be a great series.
And
that's exactly what it is to me.
Yep.
And like I don't think that there's anything more to be said about that situation. Like it's one of those series that you're gonna get the 2 best teams in the league. You're not getting the 2 best teams in the league by virtue of regular season standings. You're just
right. Tampa takes their foot off the gas pedal in the regular season. We know this.
And look, I was fully prepared for the switch flip at some point. It just
totally.
It's one of those things. I don't think they. Let's be real. Have they done this smoothly? Not really. I mean, even the Florida series had moments where, like, The Panthers threw everything they had at them, and Vasilevsky being Vasilevsky is the reason why you win, right? And Toronto had them on the ropes, and the Rangers had them on the ropes. So it's fully possible that Colorado could do the same.
Tampa in 7.
Okay, that is totally fair. I find it interesting that you're saying Tampa in 7 because of the fact that would mean they're going to win this cup
in Colorado.
On the road. We will see. I will tell you one thing. Man, I never, because I don't want to say it as a statement because this is more, I guess, I really do not know where game 1 is going to go because I have full visions of Colorado being on the end of the game that they handed to Vegas a few years back, where it's like, listen, this could be lopsided because one team was playing on Saturday night and the other one was sitting there since Tuesday.
Right.
It
could be. Yeah.
Or actually, it was earlier than that. It was since Monday, I believe. But either way,
something
like
that.
I mean?
Yeah. It's the age-old question: rest versus rust.
Right. I do think Colorado comes in with more health.
Right, and I think going into the Stanley Cup Finals, I think you'd rather have the rest. I think in the first 2 rounds, I think you'd rather be the team playing the 6 or 7 game series going up against the team that just swept and is rested.
Now, by the way, I do want to mention, because I forgot, that Cogliano is also injured.
Right.
And if anybody saw him at the end of game 4, which is where the injury happened, he wasn't even shaking hands with his right hand because it was just dangling. There was nothing left to it. He was done for, and we'll see what happens with that. But I still think that I think there's elements like Tampa's going to eventually. You just got to expect that there are guys who are weary because of the amount that they've played in the last 3 years, and Colorado hasn't. And Colorado's got some youth on their hands that I think helps them. Like, I think there's a different.
Oh, are you saying what I think you're saying?
I already said Colorado's going to win the series. Okay. I just don't.
Give me a number.
You know what? I've always felt that it was, it's going to be a long series. I think this is a 7.
I was going to say, because if you say 6, that means you're saying they're winning it in Tampa. And
no, you know what? I'll say 7.
Okay.
I can see it being 6 because I don't think there's an element to me for Colorado that playing on the road does not matter. And I think the biggest reason to say that is because of the way the St. Louis series ended. That looked like it was a disaster ready to happen in the sense that, hey, listen, it's a tie game going to overtime. Okay, buckle up because if St. Louis wins, it's another trip back to Colorado for game 7.
Fair enough.
And they flat out took it right beforehand and stunned a building that was, that we have to also acknowledge the building prior that celebrated the Stanley Cup before. Like, they not in the building the night they won, but it's a building where they have expectations for that team because they did win in the not so distant future. I mean, it feels like the distant future given everything that has happened since then. Tampa Bay's won 2 Stanley Cups in a COVID world, but but still, you got to acknowledge that they do know how to break hearts on the road. So I don't want to put it past them if they go up 3-2, but I think game 1's going to be a really big tell-all because if Tampa finds a way to win on the road, then I think all the home ice stuff just goes out the window and it doesn't matter. And, and then if Tampa wins, even if it's not game 1, if Tampa wins a road game, Colorado needs to win a road game just to put that whole thing to bed.
I agree. Because if you go down 3-1, we're in trouble here.
Yep. Well, you don't want to be the team that knowingly, it's not even close to the same scenario, but it becomes very 74 Flyers where you're up 3-1 based on your home games. You go on the road in game 5 and if you're Tampa and you're up 3-1 and maybe you lose that one because
there's not a whole lot of pressure on that game.
Because it's backs against the wall and know what the situation is. But if you do lose that game 5,
the pressure's on game 6.
You're not, but I feel like you're not coming home saying, you know what would be great? Let's go make another trip to Colorado after this. When it's Tampa, there is an element to it where
it puts all the pressure on that game 6.
It does, but there's an element of it to me where the travel is important because.
And we are talking Colorado to Tampa. That's a pretty significant flight.
There's a big difference between playing your one playoff series with it's Tampa, Florida. Oh wow, it's only a trip across state.
Right. It's an hour and a half on the bus.
Right, practically. As opposed to the idea of legit cross country travel where you're talking Colorado's all the way over here and you got to come back to Tampa. eventually it's going to get tired for somebody, and the idea is going to be, let's just put an end to this thing, and somebody's going to do it. That's why, you know what? And that's kind of why I'm leaning with the home ice thing, because like the home ice finale says, put an end to this thing. We shouldn't want to have to do this.
All right. Speaking of putting an end to things, that's a good time for us to put an end to this podcast. We will be back. We haven't really decided yet if we're going to be back in 2 weeks or if we're going to be back in just over 2 weeks. If it depends on the Stanley Cup Final, we haven't really talked about that yet. But we will be back at some point in roughly 2 weeks to talk about, the playoffs. Talk about everything. Kind of do our normal show we do every 2 weeks over the summer. In case you're new here. You can find our shows everywhere you find your podcast: Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcasts, sportstalkphilly.com. Check out our YouTube channel. Subscribe over there. Follow Sports Talk Philly at Sports Talk PHL. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Follow the podcast at YWT Podcast. Kevin, Stanley Cup Finals. 2 best teams in the league. Are you excited?
I'm very excited for the series. What I'm kind of disappointed about is the fact that we had this tonight, obviously, on our usual Sunday record date that we do, and there's been nothing on this evening. Not even to turn on even the NBA Finals was off tonight, so it's like it feels like there's no primetime event tonight. And then the gap from now until Wednesday night, it's gonna be a long couple days.
It'll be worth it. It'll be worth it.
Well, and I don't love. I'll be honest. I don't love the Wednesday to Saturday gap either.
I don't either, but I get it to put it on a weekend.
No, but there was a difference between if that would have gone to a Tuesday Game 7, and we probably wouldn't have been doing a show if that was the case. But
right,
they would have started on Saturday and just rolled every other day right through to the end, and now instead they're incorporating
There's some weird
this
gaps
gap for whatever reason, but. It's beside the point. It is what it is. I'll accept it for what it is. And once we get to Saturday, we're smooth. It's smooth sailing every other day.
Every other day, we're going to get high-quality hockey until we have a Stanley Cup champion. I don't think it's going to be much longer after that we're going to have some real, obviously, we're going to have some real Flyers news to talk after that, because the coaching thing's going to pick up once the Cup Final's over for sure. If it doesn't in the next 2 days, then it will after the Final's over. And then what are you going to have after that's over? A week? Until, maybe. It depends on how long it goes. But if it goes 7, like we kind of are leaning towards, you have about a week until the draft and then 2 weeks until free agency opens. Yep. We are off and rolling. We are full-blown in our summer schedule, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. So until then, we'll see you.